It's been almost a month since Donald Trump totally embarrassed that douchebag Kamala Harris in the general election. And now the conservatives are making fun of the fact that left-wing hacks can't budget their money, and and her campaign is bankrupt. None of her debts have actually been met. The entertainment that she promised the people that she paid to show up didn't get paid. All right, so I started wondering how much of the left-wing screaming and totally going ballistic because Donald Trump stomped her is real. I work in Portland, Oregon. Arguably one of the most liberal towns in America. And I started asking questions. I soon realized that even Portland, Oregon, if you went by county, did not vote for Kamala Harris. There was only one county that was actually blue. And that happened to be Multnomah, of course, where I work. So, let's talk about it. I'm Anatoly Anatolisova, and this is Patriots Must Rise. We dodged a bullet with Kamala Harris not being elected. We dodged a bullet with Hillary Clinton not being elected. Why do I say that? The simple truth is that the Democrat Party has never been the party of the little guy, of the working class. Never been the party of the working class. Proof of that is the Civil War. Now, grade schoolers are taught to believe that it was about slavery. That the Democrats of the South wanted to keep the slaves, only they call them Republicans now. They refuse to actually admit the shortfalls of their party. Anyway, for a brief history lesson, you have an argument over who should have won the presidency. Okay, the Democrats were very upset that the new party, the Republicans, won the White House. Then it wasn't the White House, it was the presidential palace. But the presidency was secure on the Republican side. The abolitionists, the ones that wanted to abolish slavery, that later became known as the Republicans. However, big business in the South, the plantation owners, didn't want to retool. We were entering an industrial age in the North. The invention of a cotton gin easily could have freed the slaves, and eventually did. It wasn't Abraham Lincoln. It was the fact that people started actually realizing that you could cover more ground with a mechanical tractor and a device behind it than 17 rows of slaves that didn't want to be there. But to retool is very expensive. And to be honest, have you ever met a Democrat that wasn't on a power trip? They loved lording over the people that they called slaves. And they didn't want to give that up. But there is another factor to the Civil War. A factor that, if the argument was made in the North and it wasn't about whether or not somebody should be able to keep slaves, I would completely agree with. And that was that the South did not feel that the government should have a right to tell them how to live their lives. That's right. We didn't fight one war about basic freedoms in America on American soil. We fought two. The second revolution was the Civil War. And one of the basic principles was government overreach. This is something that has come up over and over again throughout the American landscape. Every county, every state has had to deal with this fight at some level in order to maintain the state's identity. Recently, we had an overturning of what the liberals call a basic human right. Wait for it. The right to murder your child. But what they don't teach these overly emotional shitheads on the left is that Roe versus Wade was never about abortion. It was about the right to privacy that the woman should have in the hospital when she is getting treatment. And that was never overturned, because the Democrats also instated what we call HIPAA, an act that protects the patient's privacy from everything except a judge's warrant for the information. And in many cases, it actually protects them from that. So, really, none of the arguments that the left is saying about Roe versus Wade being overturned were ever valid. Now, I've heard people tell me that they don't agree that Roe versus Wade was actually a violation of the First Amendment, just being in the courts at all. But understand this. The very definition of a family is an institution of religion. That fetus growing in the mother's womb is an extension of that family. Therefore, when the First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law regarding institutions of religion, it's literally saying, Supreme Court, you have no right to rule on this. And I will stand by that to the day I die. We have a lot of friction in this country right now because of basic ideology that will not be reconciled anytime soon. And a lot of it has to do with basic gaslighting on both sides. The abortion issue, trans rights, which I believe is laughable from the beginning. But beyond that, the right to actually govern over yourself. With the left constantly policing what people say on these platforms, we don't have any true freedoms in America anymore. We have to be able to protect it. And we can't do that unless we are able to communicate. We can't actually do more than put a Band-Aid on the wound until we can actually get a dialogue going. We are only a few weeks away from getting rid of the worst president in the United States history and the worst DEI hire vice president in the United States history. To replace them with the president that should have been in office in the first place if the Democrats hadn't cheated in 2020. With the substantial victory of Donald Trump on November 5th, 2024, the question of whether or not the Dems cheated in the 2020 election was answered beyond a shadow of a doubt. If you compare the maps by county in 2016 and 2020, or 2016, 2020, and 2024, by county, you see that the direction of the votes were substantially red. This should concrete the fact that they cheated. Here's the ironic part. Throughout Joe Biden's presidency, they called us election deniers. They acted like it was a mortal sin to actually want a fair election and to say that if there's any question of the election, that maybe there needs to be another election. Now that Trump won and the Democrat power is not there anymore, the Dems are trying to say that, yes, we cheated, so Trump can't be in the White House because he already served 2 terms. If you have half a brain, you know that that's not how it works, because Donald Trump wasn't in the White House in his 2nd term. That was stolen from him. I can't talk, I'm sorry. And yet that's what they're trying to say. This begs the question of an honest intellectual argument. And that argument is whether or not a person actually wants to be intellectually honest. And if the case is that they don't, should they be allowed to participate as a citizen of the United States? I don't believe they should. I believe if you identify yourself as a liberal, as a left-wing liberal, you need to be thrown into the middle of Afghanistan or some other extreme Muslim country and see how long you live. As you witness your friends being executed by virtue of being thrown off of the top of a building head first, you might change your mind as to whether or not America is the best country in the world. It might not be perfect. By any means that people have brought up, I can honestly say that I do not believe that America is perfect. But show me one better. Show me one that actually gives people that would otherwise have no opportunity at all the opportunity to succeed. And I will honestly tell you that I do not believe that you are being intellectually honest with yourself. Granted, our colleges have sold out to Satan. Industry has bought the abortion industry and the Democrat Party in favor of what they call women's rights and women's health. By conveniently neglecting to tell the women that we have a financial stake in you not having kids because we need you in the workforce, and we don't like it when you take a maternity leave. After you realize that, how can you possibly say that the Democrat Party isn't manipulating women? This is the end of 2024. We are entering 2025. And traditionally, this is a time where we have a list of resolutions that we want to try to make happen in our lives. And I believe that it would benefit everybody to stop working toward division in this country and start realizing who the actual slave masters are. There's a reason that the Democrat Party is terrified right now because Donald Trump has instated a new government agency to oversee government efficiency that has the power to eliminate the bureaucracy. Because it is the bureaucracy in America that actually gives the Democrats power. Donald Trump knows that. After all, he was a Democrat forever. RFK knows that. He was a Democrat forever. Elon Musk is very aware of that. What do these men have in common other than being Democrats? Is it possible that they have seen firsthand, because they are in the top tax brackets? Is it possible that they've actually realized that the Democrat Party is not the party for the people? And it is not honest to actually say that they are. Is it possible that Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, RFK is not a rich man, by the way, have all realized that the biggest threat in America happens to be the constant division of Americans, to the point that we're fighting amongst ourselves and refusing to go to holiday events as families because of these divisions. For once we have divided amongst ourselves, the enemies of our country, of our citizenship, and of our families have won. We really cannot afford to have any form of division in America as we are entering World War III. And we can't afford to let liberal scumbags that are terrified of their own rhetoric to control whether or not we have a right to defend ourselves. Because the biggest deterrent against invading America for the past 200 years, over 200 years, has always been the fear that every citizen has a gun underneath their bed. Japan warned the emperor before Pearl Harbor that you do not want to wake the sleeping giant. That's what they were referring to. We didn't win a war against Japan in World War II with two really big bombs. We won the war in the South Pacific for a lot of little reasons that had to do with logistics, that had to do with superior naval power. They feared the bombs. Don't get me wrong. But they also knew that we probably only had the two that we dropped. That we were using a Hail Mary to disrupt and break their morale. And don't get me wrong, it did break their morale. But the people that we were fighting against in the South Pacific had a resolve to fight to the very last man. That was never broken. So what happened? What happened was their narrative changed. They came up with the idea, maybe because of the bomb, maybe because of the direction that the war was going, and we were fighting on their turf. That if we can't even win on our own home field, how could we possibly defeat these men and women that are not even fighting for their home? It might have been an irrational argument. It might have been something that the masses came up with without any help from the powers that be. But the reality was that the political structure of Japan crumbled after two bombs were dropped. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On December 7th. Now, or it wasn't December 7th, because of December 7th. December 7th was Pearl Harbor. What the history books don't tell us, in many ways, is that we were not innocent in whether or not we defended Pearl Harbor, whether or not we provoked Pearl Harbor. There were some stupid orders that were saying tie down the planes so the birds were grounded, which didn't help in defending Hawaii. And the brass that gave those orders probably should have been executed on the spot. But many believe that FDR needed a way to get into the war. It would have been political suicide to go in without a provoked attack. And Pearl Harbor was the perfect way to do it. We all know that the Democrats make a lot of money off of the industrial war complex. And so do some very corrupt Republicans. Well, on December 7th, I think it was 1941, the Japanese retaliated against America. They retaliated against America because we were cutting off their supply lines, and Japan is an island chain. They survive, and their population exists by having multiple shipments of supplies coming in daily. And those supply lines were being cut off by American marine mines that were meant for the Nazi U-boats. But if we actually talk about this, we're conspiracy theorists. If we talk about this, we don't know what we're talking about. That's not what history says. But it is what history says. We're not the good guys in the history books of every other country in the world. But the saying goes that history is written by the victors. But it's not always written by the victors. It's written by the country that is teaching the students at the time. In Germany, the narrative of the Holocaust is way different than what we learn in America. And I'm glad that it is, because in America, many teachers are saying the Holocaust never happened. I've been to the sites where the death camps were, in Poland and Germany. A few other places. I've been to a lot more of the work camps. And yes, it was horrific. But for some reason, it is not beneficial for the public schools to teach the truth. And teachers can get fired for teaching the truth. I am grateful for the fact that I didn't grow up in public schools, at least not really. My education came from public schools that were part of the American European Command. So I had a first-hand experience of basically the same education that German students had. I learned that it was very important to never forget what had been done in the past, even if we weren't part of it. And yes, when African Americans talk about reparations, I believe partially that that's what they are talking about. I believe that they want people to maybe acknowledge that at some point in their family's history, they were wronged. But there are those that take it way too far and try to say that those reparations are deserved by the people that never lived through the trauma. I never owned slaves. My family came to America in 1965. if you do the math, that's not exactly possible. Especially considering the end of slavery began in 1830. The abolitionists that became the Republican Party fought real hard to make sure that even though the documentation of the foundation of America says that all men are created equal, that one day those words would actually be meant. America was never perfect and never had been. We were founded by sinners. At least one of our original colonies happened to be a penal colony. Do we apologize for the actions of the rapists, murderers, and pirates that happened to be settling Georgetown? As far as I know, we barely hear about Georgetown. Do we exercise remorse for the several people that were murdered during the Salem witch trials? Yet it's funny, because most people don't even realize that the witch trials never actually happened in the city that we call Salem today. It happened in a village outside of Salem called Salem Village that has now been engulfed by the city of Salem. But the politics and struggles of the people that lived in Salem Village were far different than what was actually going on in the aristocratic town of Salem. The Salem witch trials became synonymous with American history, and yet most people don't know a whole lot about it. And that's intentional. Because if we actually did teach about it, I think our entire system of government would probably be changed forever. And that scares a lot of people. All right. As we get closer to Christmas, I want people to acknowledge the blessings that they have been given. I want people to look at what they can do for their fellow brother and sister that might not have what they need for everyday survival. If you see somebody that might be struggling, buy them a meal. Because that's what Christ commanded. He said that the greatest commandment was that you love your neighbor as I have loved you. I am Anatoly Anatolisva, and this is Patriots Must Rise. Please live free, die well, and as Christ said, love your neighbor as Christ has loved you. About this time, there's a QR code in the upper corner that is a gateway to a way to donate to support this channel. We are completely crowdfunded. I don't want to be controlled by any sponsor, because I want to be able to talk about the subjects that are important to me and hopefully important to you. And I don't want to be filtered. So please, if you can, like, subscribe, and use the QR code and donate. Thank you, and happy holidays. Merry Christmas.